Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Clerks 3. This is the 9th overall feature film, according to Wikipedia, set in the View Askew universe. I think. I've never counted, but there's been a lot of them. It takes place many years after Clerks 2. This movie I have very mixed feelings about, because there's certain elements of this film I really like. I really like a lot, actually. And there's other elements that I really don't like, and I'm super confused what the fuck is going on here. And I think that's a feeling, this isn't as bad as Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which was pretty cringy in terms of its references. Like, I think most of Ben Affleck's cameo is him making references to Kevin Smith movies or movies he was in, and it's just like, there was no context other than making references. And Clerks 3 is not that. But Clerks 3 is also not a total movie. I've long felt, and you've probably heard me say it on podcasts and on my Jersey Girl review, that I felt Jersey Girl was this nexus point for Kevin Smith, where all his films were about him, and they're personal to him, and they're sort of, about his experience. And as soon as Jersey Girl happened, after we got the sort of failure of Jersey Girl, if Jersey Girl had been a success, I'm very curious what his career would have been like. But it wasn't. And so, he seemed to retreat and did like Clerks 2. He seemed to not really want to evolve anymore. And it seemed like because this audience wouldn't evolve with him, he kind of got cold feet, because he was most of his audience were in college. They didn't want to see a film that was a meditation on what would parenthood be like if his wife died, which is as a script. It's interesting about parental sacrifice and the things you go up and the life changes. And I actually thought, as a parent now, it was sort of interesting and doesn't totally come. It's not my favorite Kevin Smith movie or anything, but I feel like the failure of that put him in this weird path. And when I heard Clerks 3, it's mainly about Dante and Randall own the Quick Stop at this point. It was the end of Clerks 2, and in this, Randall has a heart attack and then realizes he wastes his life and decides to make a movie about Quick Stop and his whole life called Inconvenience. Because, Clerks is already a movie, obviously. It's him making the movie with, Jay and Silent Bob. And Silent Bob actually shoots it and explains why it would be in black and white, which is... I forgot about that. He mentions because it's ugly in here and the colors and it'll look better and aesthetically. And he brings up the security camera thing. I forgot about the security camera thing, to be honest with you. I remember people brought that up in the 90s. And, but it also, you don't think about that because security cameras are just, regular cameras now. But I'm glad he said it. They're making this movie and you see clips directly from the original Clerks, which are his experiences. They're basically recreating elements from the original Clerks, sometimes recontextualizing lines of dialogue and things like that. The reason they reference things they're actually thematic in this and connect a little better. But I think ultimately Kevin Smith as a writer can't just let us relate to him on a certain level. Maybe it's because he's comfortable. Maybe it's because he's scared, to be honest with you. Maybe it's because he doesn't want to fully get into the complications of life, which I think is something that he used to be able to do, but somehow restrained himself, which is not a thing celebrities usually do, but Kevin Smith does. So there's certain creative things he does, particularly with Dante, that I really don't like. I should bring up, I just really want to get into the spoilers of this. I want to fully talk about this movie. I noticed certain elements have not been discussed in reviews I've seen, at least, but I would like to talk about them. So basically, I'm extremely mixed on this movie. I think I enjoyed it and was more okay with it than Clerks 2, but overall, I think he gives you a very mixed vision that is so close to being, he made a good movie again. It's a little frustrating that he doesn't fully get there, and I think if you want to see a nostalgia Kevin Smith movie and you didn't see Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, I think this is the better of the options completely. It's a much better movie than that, and I still think he could make a nostalgia movie work better than this if he really tried, but this is not it, but it's at least a semi sort of step in the right direction, I guess. I'm going to talk about spoilers, specifically pretty major things, and I will get into the end of the movie and stuff. So if you really don't want it spoiled, then don't watch past this. If you don't care, then sure. We've heard about Randall, and we know about Randall, and Randall and Dante are going to make this movie. Thing is, what's Dante's plot? And that's the issue I sort of have with this. Is in this, you remember, if you see publicity for it, you kept seeing pictures of Rosario Dawson, who I assumed was in this. Then you learn pretty early on that his wife died. Rosario Dawson's character died. And you're like, oh no, when did that happen? And then you find out pretty much after Clerks 2. Like, I don't know when, but within that year, which is like, holy shit. And so Dante is like, kind of just been depressed, missing Rosario Dawson's character. It's heavily implied that she was pregnant. He's sort of just been hanging out with Randall ever since. I do not, whereas in Jersey Girl, I totally understand how he felt about like his wife dying and stuff like that. I have no fucking clue what he's saying with this one. I'm just like, is he just being melodramatic for the sake of it? Is there like a point to his melodrama in this? Like, I don't really fully get it. It's super strange. I don't understand it. I think it would have made more sense if Dante actually is married and maybe, does have a certain amount of life, but he's still hanging out with Randall and helping Randall make this movie about his life, and like the contradictions, and maybe he like sort of needs this even though he sacrificed so much of himself, or just needs like an extra element. There's like certain things they could do that would probably be interesting to hear from a guy who's a filmmaker who has a family, and like how he figures that out and things like that. I would find to be sort of fascinating, but they don't do that. She's just dead because I guess that's what you do. I really don't understand what they're saying with it. Whereas like when you did it in Jersey Girl, there was like a point that was like the point of the whole movie. It's like, that's fine, but like in this, it's just, I don't know. And then she shows up as a ghost all the time, which is the other strange thing. Like, there are certain elements like Veronica coming back actually. Like Caitlin could not because she has died, which they dedicated the film to her, which was very nice. I like seeing Veronica again. She should be in more Kevin Smith stuff. I think she deserves it. Frankly, I thought she was actually pretty good. Brandon Halloran, who plays Dante, I think probably gives one of his better performances, but I think the emotion and the melodrama of it just like sort of kills that whole thing. But I did like Jeff Anderson as Randall, what he was doing there. The music cues in this, it honestly just felt like he put a track in and just like let it flow. And I know there's certain movies like Crooklyn is a movie that's pretty notorious for that, where it's just like usually you have a score and it ends at one scene and then starts another and stuff like that. This is just like, they had the Degrassi theme where it's like Randall is coming out of his heart surgery and stuff, and it just like keeps going through scene to scene to scene. I'm like, why am I listening to the Degrassi theme? Like, I understand Jane, Silent Bob were on Degrassi, but Dante and Randall weren't. Maybe I missed. I mean, there was a lot of Degrassi guys. I used to watch it, but like, there's too much of Degrassi Next Generation. So maybe Clerks show up and like they sell, Drake or Jimmy like a new wheelchair. I don't know. I'm confused by why Degrassi is in here. It's weird. Some of the music cues, I'm like, why is the Soul Asylum song not in here? Like why music cues from the original Clerks, or even some of the Clerks too, which, and I don't like the character of Elias. I don't like, they could have just done a retcon and not had Elias, could have moved on, but I don't know what the appeal of that character is. I don't get it. It's a little interesting that he's not a Christian anymore, he's a Satanist. Like, that was sort of funny, but in Jane, Silent Bob, it sort of works a little better because of they changed RST video into a dispensary, and the whole joke of like they still sell weed, like it's still illegal, which I think is kind of funny. With Jay's like, that's how we did it in the 90s, like that's their business practice. That is actually kind of funny. You see, that's the thing. It's like, they're good ideas. Like Randall trying to express himself in older age, which I actually do think people should be. There isn't a stop to being creative and making things. It's like a thing I really think people shouldn't just feel like, oh, well, I didn't make art in my 20s, so it's over. I think, and the way they did it was really interesting stuff, and it had been just about Randall, and like maybe Dante had been on the side or something, I'd like this movie a lot more. But just like the Dante plotline, I'm like, what is going on here, bro? Is like the heart attack stuff made sense, but then the other plotline with Dante, so we start with Randall's heart attack, and he survives the Widowmaker, and then Dante has a heart attack and doesn't. And that was a plotline that I was confused by, because I was like, is the point that like, most people, they die of these heart attacks, like odds are both of them were not going to live and stuff, but at the same time, like, what were we saying with like, I felt like Dante, the character, was just like left in a lurch, and like he didn't know what he was saying with him, which is disappointing because in the Clerks movie there should be something they're saying with these, and like I felt like his plotline had something to say in 2, and in 3 it's just like this is Randall's movie pretty much, which, you know, that's cool, but I don't see why Dante. I don't get that at all. And the way they recontextualized Salsa Shark was I actually thought that was interesting, one of his better references in this, but I don't know what they're doing with the Dante character. It actually sort of like annoyed me, but that they just like that Kevin Smith could not figure out what to do with like a character who we all thought was sort of him. I remember thinking, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've been wrong about this the whole time, and it feels like maybe through his podcasting and through like being a podcast guy who goes to cons and is like Mr. Nerd, and I've been doing Comic-Con panels and Small Rats and stuff like that, which like he has, and he deserves that like elder dork nerd status, but at the same time like it feels like he's more Randall now than Dante. Like his personality has shifted, and I get the heart attack, and this is sort of a personal film to him in a lot of ways, but I just felt like he couldn't commit to really expressing himself through it. A lot of people have said maybe it's because he cares so much more about podcasting and being general Kevin Smith personality and stuff like that, which maybe I did feel that a little, but I especially felt it as the movie ends and we're watching the credits and there's like music, you know how credits work, and then suddenly it goes, hi, it's Kevin Smith, and he explains an ending he wanted to shoot but didn't, which I was like, I'm sorry, you made this movie. What are you telling me? You couldn't... He decided not to because he liked the ending it was. It doesn't sound like they shot it, so to me it's like he made some cop-out excuse. I've never seen a director go, hey, I wanted to make this under ending. So like, I mean, Coppola should have done that in Godfather 2, probably. I've never heard of that. I know he's put on his podcast like with Tusk, because Tusk was on his podcast. They had the snippet from the podcast where they came up with the idea to do Tusk, or he came up with the idea. And that sort of naturally makes a little more sense. But in this, it's just like, I've never heard a director come up with a different ending, which sounds like a better ending, but it also feels like them finding meaning in a character who has a point in this. It just felt like adding an extra button to a character who, one, like his plotline really was over, and adding this like whole thing with Randall that he's been this filmmaker for 90 years, and like that, like, you know, Inconvenience or Clerks was his big breakout, and he asked like, well, he was in his job at the convenience store is only great because of the customers, instead of what he says originally, that like this job would be great if it wasn't for the customers, showing that like he loved the experiences along the way, or what he really likes about making Clerks and all those things, not just like Clerks itself, which is like true, but you're also doing that through the guise of this movie that you've been able to live off of for all this time. It almost felt like to me as well is like someone who realized like, hey, I did a pretty amazing thing with Clerks. It's in the National Film Registry. It's this film, this big classic in the indie film world. No matter what I do, I still have this thing, and it still loves it, and it's still important to me, and it takes on different meanings as time has gone on. And that element to this film is actually pretty interesting, and I kind of liked, even though the sentiment is just like, I'm more happy with like the friends I made and the experiences I had because of it, more so than the movie, which is like interesting. I mean, I don't know, interesting, but it's just like heartwarming, and like how you'd expect Kevin Smith to feel. But at the same time, I do feel like this is like, you can have Randall be the focus point instead of Dante, which it feels like the other two films really were. But you usually had Randall doing sort of something, or like made sense in the context of the movie, and in this it just doesn't really do that, and it's disappointing, I think. I wish he had maybe rethought about what he was doing with Dante. It does feel better than his more recent stuff, honestly, and it felt like he was getting closer to doing something. I don't know his workflow, or like how his podcasts work and all that. This just felt like it needed a little more thinking out, and I kind of just wish it'd been about Dante, older, with a family life, and like that heart attack. If, like, let's say him and Rosario Dawson had a kid and he dies of that heart attack making this movie, that shows the extra layer of what that heart attack could have done to Kevin Smith as his family, as he, like, I believe he had a heart attack while he was on stage, while he was working, and it just felt like that plot line wasn't personal, and this film felt very personal in a lot of ways. It's just like both Dante and Randall, I think, had to have a personal story to Kevin Smith, And unfortunately, he kind of couldn't commit to it fully, and that hurts it overall. I think the Clerks sequels could never... Clerks is a hard thing because it probably should have never had a sequel, and he was not the indie filmmaker anymore. And this feels like a guy who's more like Kevin Smith in the nerd realm, and he understands like continuity and things going on. And like even when View Askew Universe was new and doing it was different, and now it just feels like that's how things are and stuff like that. Also, Randall explaining the Mandalorian to a cast member of the Mandalorian is pretty funny. And as much as I was like, yeah, I guess most old Star Wars guys do accept Mandalorian more so than those sequel movies, which is interesting. I will probably look back on moments of Clerks 3 fondly, and I'm not as bummed about Kevin Smith as a lot of people are when they review this movie in particular, because frankly, Reboot I think was way worse, and you can think those things about Reboot. I think he was like trying. I really do actually think he was trying. Everyone else is saying like he didn't give a shit. You get that sort of like, I do think some of that is in here, but not as much as like other movies. I think he tried to do something, tried to be a little more personal. I sort of hope he does continue it at some point. I think he could have more to say with it. But we'll see. If this is his kind of attempt to come back, it feels like a band trying to like get back their magic, and at first you're kind of like happy, but then you listen to the full album and okay, and then you might put a few tracks on a playlist, but for the most part you're sort of done with it. And that's sort of how I feel about this. I'm glad you got the band back together, but I don't think you thought fully about what that meant. And I think if you were going to do that and going to do it in this way, he should have, and that's why I'm disappointed more than anything. But I do think there's enough in here that if you want to be enjoying and have that self-reflection through this, it is there and it will give it to you. It's just you kind of have to go through this messy mix of things. It feels like him sort of coming up from air from a period of him not really trying as much, and felt like he was trying to relate to something, but he just didn't fully make it to actually get some of that oxygen yet. So we just kind of see him get kind of lost on the way, but you can kind of get the smell of the oxygen of what this movie kind of could have been, and it could have been something a little special. But even like they do have a part with Ethan Suplee saying the sailboat thing, which makes no sense. Man, this movie does such a mixed bag, but I guess a mixed bag that he threw in the right direction, maybe. So if you've seen Clerks 3 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.